Good afternoon, and welcome to this webinar examining the ins and outs of performance management. I'm Ray Welling, Editor-in-Chief of Workplace Info, and I'm joined today by Larry Forsyth, Senior Manager for WHS and HR Consulting for Australian Business Consulting and Solutions. Larry, welcome. Now, as we get underway, I just wanted to remind you if you have any technical issues or would like to post a question to our panelists, you can do that by typing your query into the chat box in the lower left corner of your screen. We've received quite a few questions in the lead up to this webinar, and we'll get to as many of those questions as we can during the time we have together. I'd like to point out that the information provided in the webinar today is general information only, so it does not take into account your own particular work situation or your objectives and needs. Before acting on any information contained in this discussion, you should consider the appropriateness of the information, having regard to your own objectives, work and financial situation and needs.
So a couple of questions to take away from the webinar today. So thinking about what you do from a performance management perspective now, what might be some of the challenges and what modifications will you make to your performance management approach and what might be your action plan? So just some thinking around the performance management webinar and the delivery today. So some questions for you up front. So the areas to be covered about what is performance management and what is it actually and how does it actually take place in your work area. Some reasons for underperformance and does that affect productivity in your workplace? And then the impact of good communication skills and how important that is in building relationships, trust, rapport, etc. And then how does that align performance management? So how do you do it? Some appropriate questioning and then giving positive and constructive feedback. So from a Fair Work Ombudsman's perspective, and this is from their site, it's a great slide that I use often with my clients. And so the Fair Work Ombudsman believes that employers who establish effective performance management systems can reap significant benefits from a happy, motivated and better performing workforce. Now that's a mouthful, but absolutely. And as I said, from my experience, as we deliver, as we work with organizations, individuals, if you have a happy and motivated and high performing workplace, then you are going to have a much more productive workplace. So people want to be managed, people want to get feedback, but many times they're actually not provided with that feedback. And so what might be the questions and how might you manage that better in line with the Fair Work Ombudsman? Some of the legislation and regulations that are affected by performance management, and the list is there. So I'm not going to read through all of that. You can see that. Particularly under the Fair Work Act and around that motivation, happy workplaces, being kind in the workplace as well. And so there for you as a reference. So managing people, what is it really all about? And I think that you're going to be absolute advocates here. So we see it's about allocating work, absolutely, assessing that work performance, providing the feedback, and then managing the follow-up. It seems simple on paper, but how difficult is it really? Well, my experience is that it can actually be very challenging. We're all wearing more than one hat in the workplace these days. We're managing people. We're allocating the work. We want to assess people. We want to give them the feedback. And then it's about following up as well. So these things are absolutely important when you are managing people and their performance. This is a great slide, the performance management process, if you've not seen it before. I suppose in the end it's around setting the goals, so the top circle, setting goals and planning, coaching and providing that feedback, and reviewing performance. People come to work to do a good job. They want to know what the expectations are of their manager and of the business and how that aligns with, obviously, the strategic objectives, the things that they actually have to do in the workplace and how committed they are to that. And then the capability and how then the organization, the manager and the worker can actually work together around that. So what's interesting is that there needs to be some performance standards. And why do we need to have them? Well, in fact, it actually sets an objective measurement of an individual's job performance. You know yourself that if you go shopping as an example, then there's an objective to buy food that you put on the table and you cook that and put it on the table. It's the same as actually assessing or managing people's performance. There needs to be a standard in place, and in that sense, it's about that everyone knows about it and that people agree and they work towards it. Some of the best practice performance management elements is about setting guidelines or ideas that represent the most efficient course of action. In that way, by actually setting that up, it enables the, I suppose, good results to be consistently achieved. And performance can't be assessed unless there is clarity about what is required of that person. So in that way, that's about that conversation. It might be the difficult conversation, the challenging conversation. It's about checking in with that employee, be it daily, weekly, monthly, annually even. And so where is that highlighted? Where are those sorts of performance management elements, standards, regulations, tasks, responsibility listed? Well, on the job or position description. Now, I hope that you have a position description for all of your positions and your job roles. Let's hope that if you don't, then you can certainly get in touch with me and we can support you around those sorts of things. But it's particularly important because it sets a baseline and a guideline for position descriptions and what people need to do. So what is performance management? And this was Ray's question in the very beginning, and we're up to, what is it, slide 6 or 7. So it really is about the effective performance that creates a harmonious and productive workplace, which is obviously beneficial for both the employees and the employer. Now, good performance, just in case you hadn't thought about it, is around that it's the work that is performed in the workplace, it's the duties of the position, and how that is performed to the standards required of the workplace. It's also about compliance with workplace policies, the rules, the procedures, and that's all in line with the systems, the strategic plans, the operational objectives, etc. It's also about acceptable behaviour in the workplace, and so that's about coming to work in aligning with the code of conduct and what you actually do in the workplace. So it's what are the rules, what are the boundaries, and how you can actually operate in the workplace. It's also about positive behaviour that impacts on co-workers, and of course it's about getting the job done to the satisfaction of the employer. And as I said, no one comes to work to do a bad job, but it's about that you build that rapport and trust through having the conversation and letting people know what the standards are and what is it that they need to perform. So that leads me into what is underperformance. Well, in fact, it's actually the opposite of what good performance is about. So it's a failure to perform the duties of the position. It can be a non-compliance with the workplace policies, the rules or procedures, and unacceptable behaviour in the workplace can sometimes be disruptive and negative. It impacts on the morale, it impacts on other co-workers. And so in that if you identify, and that's what I say to managers when we work across many sectors, that if there's at any time that you get a bit of an inkling or a little bit uncomfortable about managing someone, giving them the feedback, then it's also really important to actually take notes, to document. Document is my catch cry. And in that way, if you need to check on those files, check on those documents that you can't remember, then it can be something that you can always move back to. But remembering that underperformance is not the same as misconduct. So misconduct is very serious behaviour, such as theft or assault, which may warrant instant dismissal. I remember working with a client around one of their employees who had been looking after some petty cash, and that client or that particular worker had been actually stealing petty cash from the petty cash tins over a period of time. And in that sense, to cut a very long story short, the person was actually behaving in the wrong way. So it wasn't about the performance per se, it was around that was really actually misconduct. And so I always recommend to organizations, to managers, that if you identify that, then before taking action, you need to seek advice about that. Probably from a legal perspective would be a good way to go. But obviously to document place, time, who is involved, etc. Some of the reasons for underperformance can also be about no feedback on the employee's performance from the manager. When I travel around, even today, I hear managers and employees say to me that they don't receive feedback from their manager, that their manager only comes to them when there's a problem. Well, that's not how you build rapport and trust, I suggest. So people do like feedback. They may not always ask for it. And then why don't people give feedback? Well, that's something for you to think about, and I'll touch on that shortly. It can also be about a mismatch between the employee's capabilities and the job expectations, and that's why we have probationary periods as well. Obviously, position descriptions and inductions, and all of these things link into performance. It could also be about employee lacks the skills and knowledge. There might be some morale issues in the workplace, and so therefore the employee is not performing to their peak level because of what's happening in the workplace. or there might even be some personal issues around family stress, drug and alcohol issues, those sorts of things. And then, as important, some of the cultural misunderstandings or even workplace bullying. And we are seeing some of that in workplaces today. So it is something to think about if someone is underperforming, and it's about asking the questions. It's about working with that person. So sometimes it can be as simple as, are you okay? So performance reviews. Well, a performance review provides managers and employees with the opportunity to ensure the job requirements are understood, provide feedback, review performance, describe those short and long-term goals that need to be achieved, and to identify learning and development needs. I like to see a nice contemporary performance management framework that has a beginning and an end. It is ongoing, in fact, as well, but it's about as that employee comes into the business, how they are recruited, how they are inducted, and then how are they appraised, and that feedback that they're given against their roles, tasks, responsibilities, and key performance indicators. And it should also include a learning and development element to it as well. So what is it that employee needs to undertake from a learning and development perspective that will support them to actually perform better if it is required? What I hear, what I see, and some of my experiences around that some managers actually spend 80% of the time on the problem employee and 20% of the time on the high-performing employee. So there's a little bit of an 80-20 rule there, and it's not completely fair. And so I think it's about that managers should be conscious of that and mindful of how they actually support their employees, and in that way, it can build a better performance management review and appraisal framework. It can also be about that the documentation in that sense should be explained to the employee. So the provision is that managers should receive performance appraisal or performance review training, but so should the employee, I believe. And my experience on delivering and facilitating these sessions is that employees have come to me at the end of the sessions and say, you know, really, gee whiz, I'd never been on a performance appraisal training session before. Sometimes I've actually felt threatened about it in the past, but now I'm actually starting to understand what were the reasons for the review, how will it be carried out, what might the process be, and will it be followed, and also part of their responsibility. So it's not just the manager's responsibility in reviewing performance, it's also the employees. And what particular types of forms of performance appraisal or reviews will actually take place. And that's about setting up the framework for both you as the manager, your employees, and the organization as a whole. So people managers have a responsibility for applying performance reviews, and they need to understand the following elements. How and why the process was developed, and as part of that facilitation, we set that up from the very beginning. So sometimes it comes out of a cultural survey, a staff satisfaction survey. It particularly comes out of contemporary HR practice. And so in that way, what we see is a happier and more motivated workplace actually undertakes performance reviews, provides people with feedback, and in that way it becomes much more systematic. So it's a system for gathering and reporting and storing employee information. There should be the expectations of the staff, and that should be filed. It's also about managers learning how to actually conduct the meeting. Any relevant industrial relations and other legislation might also be mentioned at that point in time. You don't want to go too deep, and in that way, you know, the employee might sort of zone out, but you know that it's there under some of that sort of regulation. It's also about making sure that you have the required resources, so your documents, your checklists, your templates, and how you're going to actually document that, and how you actually do it with the employee, and the period of time that you do it, and how often. And in that way, it does support ongoing learning and development options, and it also relates to your relevant policies and procedures. So if you don't have a performance policy and procedure in place, it's certainly something that you should start to think about, start to develop, and to gain perhaps third-party support around that as well. From an employee perspective, well, then they should understand how the process will work, just like you as managers, what happens with the information gathered, what input they have before, during, and after the review process, how will they be reviewed and assessed, what criteria will be applied, and how feedback will be gathered and applied. So I'd be saying to managers, and as we facilitate this through organizations, again, it's a systematic approach. It's about being really open and honest and fair with the documentation and the systems you have in place, and that everyone becomes aware of it and understands actually how it is implemented. You'll find that once people are provided with that information, that they come to understand it, and you might get it right necessarily the first time around, particularly if you're only doing it once a year. But it's about reminding them that these things are for a particular reason, the rationale around that, and that certainly is around productivity and supporting that employee to do the best that they can possibly do all of the time. If you don't do this, then it can be quite a risk to the organization. So performance management is certainly part of the overall business risk. And in that sense, if you have a risk by not actually implementing performance management reviews, appraisals, feedback, etc., then it can sometimes lead to a significant increase in direct and indirect costs. And I'm talking about reputation, brand, I'm talking about morale, and I'm talking about culture. So all of these things actually link very, very much. And so from a HR perspective, if you are not thinking about performance reviews, it's certainly something to start thinking about and to look at in a much more deeper way. Particularly in light of the fact that sometimes when business is not doing as well, and what I've seen over the years is that HR and L&D actually drop off. There's no budgets for them. But let me tell you, based on my research through the GFC and beyond, and out of the other side of the GFC, we saw businesses, and we've worked with businesses that continue to spend money, time, effort in supporting their employees as they came out of that GFC period, then they were actually in a much better position. So doing all of that takes a lot of emotions. And so what's become very popular in the HR space, and it's been around for quite some time, and of course coined by Daniel Goldman, is around emotional intelligence. And so how do you have that difficult conversation? How do you actually manage your emotions? How self-aware are you? How do you regulate your emotions? And how socially competent are you? Is something to actually think about. So as managers in the workplace today, being the sophisticated and complex spaces that they are, we really need to work on our emotions and to make sure that we're aware of them. And in that sense, we can apply them to those situations when we are giving feedback, when we are reviewing our people, because those conversations can actually be quite difficult. So in that sense, if you're aware of your emotions and you can work on them, develop them, and you absolutely can, then it's something to be very, very mindful around. So being aware of your emotional intelligence results in these sorts of things. So better communication, better interactions, less misunderstanding, and ultimately improved people management. So it's about, again, being mindful of your emotions, because it will be very emotional for people when you go into your performance appraisal time. Some of the best practice that I wanted to bring to the attention today through the webinar is around frequent reviews, and I talked a little bit about that in the very beginning. So there is a little bit of a conversation around the HR space of the annual review, or a consistent sort of check-in, you might say, with your employee. Now, whatever works for the organization is one that I would suggest or agree with, but it's also about how often are you doing it? Is it formal, informal? What is it that people would like to do in your organization, and how formal or informal do you think that it needs to be done? I think it's also about consistent staff involvement. You want your people to be involved, and I think consultation is really important here. We see that from a risk perspective, a health and safety perspective. So the more consultation, the better. In the end result, you can still make the executive decision, but actually asking your people what will work for them, how comfortable they might be in a situation, it is actually quite empowering. It brings them on board. And so in that sense, there can be some mutual goal setting. And in fact, people become more positive about it compared to being negative. And so in that sense as well, we see more solutions being arrived at, problem solving as such to meet those challenges. And so in that way, again, it's a cyclic framework, and it's a best practice framework. Okay, so why best practice? Well, in fact, it keeps people motivated, believe it or not. It does lead to better performance, it improves productivity, and I know I've emphasized that, and I will continue to emphasize that. We see organizations and we work with organizations, facilitated performance training, and in that sense it actually improves morale and productivity. People actually like receiving feedback around how they're working. Some employees have told me that their workplace is actually not that productive and that they don't get performance appraised. Well, from my experience is that we are all human. We all do like to receive feedback, be it constructive, be it positive, and in that sense it enables us to improve. It's a continuous improvement cycle. And so in that way it informs employees of the organization's expectations as well. Performance agreements or performance action plans certainly outline the performance expectations. They can detail what needs to be achieved, clarify the roles, include any training needs in those discussions as well and documentation. And I always think it's good to set a follow-up date. It might be 12 months down the track, it might be 6 months, but it's good to actually know when that date will be set up again. People have it in their calendars, they can work towards it. Again, it's around a boundary, a rule, a procedure. And so people actually like that most of the time in complex working environments. So how to do it? Well, start with developing a policy. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. If you don't have a policy and a set of procedures for performance management, then it's certainly something that you should invest in. If you don't have a performance management system, well, what actually is contained is initially the policy and procedure. And as I said, it informs employees of the organization's performance management system right from the beginning of the induction process all the way through into that first appraisal, which might be 3 months in, 6 months in, based on your probationary time period, and then annually, if that's the way that you're going to go. From a problem-solving perspective and managing people's performance, I think it's really important that any early interventions around problems I see so much more successfully achieved than not. If there's an issue in the workplace, then as a manager, as a leader, then it's about you leading. And it's about being aware of your emotions, what you're going to say, preparing yourself, and actually giving the person the feedback. I always think it's good to get your people to manage upwards. And if they've got a problem and they come to you with that, then it's about what, you actually might ask them, well, what do they consider might be the solution? Not all performance management issues, though, will require a formal discussion, and some of them actually will just need some informal feedback, and it might be through the supervisor, those sorts of things, because you might be, as a manager, working on something a little bit more strategic. But it does create some open dialogue, and it promotes a positive culture amongst employees, and it's also about respect. So if one of your values in the organization is around respect, collaboration, professionalism, then performance management certainly sits into that environment, and it creates supportive networks for your people. So again, if you're not doing it, it's something that you really need to start to think about and start to implement. We have had, particularly around the last 12 months, or over the last 12 months, we've had organizations that have been in contact with me wondering if it's a good way to go. So we always recommend, based on our experience, and that it has been around for some time, but it's about what is going to work in your business. How comfortable will your people be? So if you're a large enterprise, then it probably has to be something quite formal. If you're a small, medium enterprise, then it can be something a little bit more informal and a little bit more intimate. But whatever you do, it's about having something in place, because you wouldn't want your people to go to the Fair Work Commission and say that they actually haven't been managed, they haven't been nurtured, encouraged, trained, etc. In that they may have been treated in an unfair, unjust, and unreasonable way. And these things aren't going to support you in a worst-case scenario. So performance management, documentation, reviews are particularly important in this sense. So providing feedback, well, you've probably seen something like this before, but there's always the message and there's always the interpretation. How do people perceive the message actually being delivered? I think it's particularly important from a management perspective to identify the tone of voice that you use, the body language that you use, the words that you use, because everyone has a different experience. Everyone makes different assumptions. Believe it or not, we all wear filters and masks, and we filter people out, and we wear a mask around who we are and how we do it. And sometimes these things can be a little bit negative. But it's about how you might open that conversation up and how you might give someone the feedback. Because If people aren't actually getting feedback in the workplace, what is the reason for that? So thinking about when you send a message and how you give someone feedback in the workplace, remember there will always be perceptions and experiences based on people's assumptions and how they might interpret that particular feedback. What's really good from a best practice perspective is continuous feedback, and I think I've harped on around that for the last sort of 30 minutes or so. But if you're giving and receiving feedback, well, then it's about learning from the feedback and what you'll actually do with that feedback, how you'll actually use that in the workplace, what might you implement based on that feedback, how you might change some of what you do, and then how you act on that in the workplace. My experience is that people that are actually given feedback in the workplace, how they actually use that in the workplace, I've seen it, I suppose, turn around and to be addressed in a much more positive way. And that supports improving people's performance. So feedback is very, very important from a giving, receiving, learning, acting, and improving performance perspective. So feedback can be both positive and negative. We would like it to be constructive because people want to know how to do something better, how they can continually improve. So be careful about and be clear about what you say. Constructive feedback does support the employees, and it's about building that rapport and trust. As I said, people have said to me, staff have said to me, managers have said to me, I don't receive feedback often. So my question is, do you actually ask for it? So if you have a culture of feedback in your business, that can certainly link to performance management frameworks. When you're giving feedback, I think it's important to put yourself in the other person's shoes. So in that sense, you create some empathy. It's about also being brief and patient. It's about breathing and being calm. And in that way, it's about your emotional intelligence and being very mindful of what you're saying, how you're saying it, that tone of voice, the body language that I mentioned. So based on past behavior, it's about the feedback there. It's not about the person. So you don't want to label the person for what they look like as an example. It has to be very separated, you might say. You want to give people feedback based on their performance, not on their personalities or who they are as a person. And you need to be very, very clear about that. So be specific. Avoid any sort of general comments. For example, all of those Chinese whispers that might be happening around the organization. In case you don't know, managers talk to managers and staff talk to staff. What do managers talk to managers around? Well, they talk to other managers around their staff that are performing. And what do staff talk to other staff about? Well, they talk about their manager and how happy or unhappy they might be. So it's good to actually, when you are giving the feedback, as I said, only give it based on the person's performance. Don't assume, and make sure you get that correct information. And that's about taking those notes. And it certainly is around that, there's two sides to every story. Be particularly careful around when you are giving feedback. So body positioning is very, very important. You want to use encouragement. It's those yes, all of those sorts of communication actives as such. And so it's also about saying thank you, paraphrasing back, showing interest in what the employee is actually doing. So really giving them your time and being very present as a manager is so important in the workplace. As I said, we're so busy and we're all wearing more than one hat. And so if you actually are going to give feedback and you are going to appraise someone, then make sure you give them your time. Show interest. Listen to what they're saying. Look for meaning behind the words that they're using and make sure you use clear language and open questioning. This is particularly important as part of the feedback movement. So successful feedback relies on good communication skills. It involves good emotional intelligence from the person providing the feedback as you as the manager. And so it's about being mindful of how you regulate your emotions, because let me tell you, in performance management and appraisals and feedback, it does evoke and elicit emotions. And they have to be controlled and regulated. So it's part of your role as a manager to be mindful of that, to be conscious of that as well. So from a performance management sequencing perspective, here's your list. So agree upon a time and day well in advance, 1 to 2 weeks. And this is not something that just happens within that period of time, because coming into the organization, the employee should be aware the performance appraisals actually do take place. At what time? 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, a daily basis, a weekly basis, whatever it is and whatever's comfortable in your workplace in support of those happy, motivated, productive moments and environments. Arrange for the office and venue to be free from interruptions. Everyone's holding their iPhone these days and looking at it at the same time. We've probably got 3 or 4 different sorts of images going on and business going on, but it's about actually giving that time to the employee and being very present around that. Allow for at least 1 hour as a time frame, so it's a very conservative time frame. Some managers have said to me over the years, gee whiz, I've got 10 people that I manage. I have to spend, an hour or 2 hours with them every year as part of the performance appraisal time. I just don't have time. And so I think, they listen to themselves say that. So, do your sums. We're talking about 20 hours of actually giving someone some formal feedback, which is really not a lot of time when you consider that the amount of time that you spend at work. Bring all of the relevant results and information relating to the staff member's performance with you. So again, that's about your documentation. That's about the information, the evidence that you've collected over that period of time. You don't want to wing it on the day. You don't want to be in a position where you're trying to gather it at the last minute. It's not going to come across well, and the employee will certainly identify that. You want to quickly establish rapport and a relaxed atmosphere. So I'm taking it that you all know how to do that. And it's just about generally checking in with each other. How's the day been going? What's actually happening? And in that way, you can build that rapport quite quickly. Be genuine and attentive throughout the meeting time. Again, being really present with the person, making sure that you spend the time with them. There's no phones ringing. You're in an office that's without interruptions, and it's in a formal environment. Ask the staff member if they've completed their part, and so it's about you've got a part to do and they've got a part. So we're seeing what's been around for some time, but still a very popular framework is around the 360 feedback. So it's feedback about the employee that you provided them, but it's also feedback for you too, which is about a very constructive situation. Inquire as to how many problems or any problems that they may have been having that's affected their performance over the period of time. It might be something that you weren't aware of. It would have been good to know that before the period, because you don't really want any surprises from either side of the story at that performance appraisal time. But it's good to actually have that question, to open it up, to check in with them. Ask what needs to be done to lift their performance if required. So you've got someone that's actually performing well. Even if they are performing well, it's certainly about, well, what else can they do to increase their performance? My experience is that people who are performing well will always want to continue to improve. They'll always want to lead. They want to be out there and doing a good job, and it'll be about how they might support themselves and others within that workplace too. In the end, you want to ensure that there's some common ground has been achieved before exploring solutions. So it might be about, well, I'm thinking that part of your performance, or to increase that, could be to move into a supervisory position, to be managed some other people, a smaller team, some extra tasks and responsibilities. But the employee may not agree to something like that. So you want to make sure that as you're doing it together, that you've got some common ground around that, and there's some mutual respect and mutuality around that. In the end, you also want to reach an agreement on the performance to be achieved. And so, for example, it's about that Ray and I checked in before the start of the webinar. We said that we would go for a period of time. This was an outcome we wanted to achieve, and so in that way, we gained mutual agreement around that. So when you're actually appraising your people and looking for that performance increase, it's about what else needs to be achieved over which period of time, and to document that. Also about setting new goals and part of that learning and development plan for the future. So what is it that your employee needs? What is it that you might need as a manager to increase your performance, to support you going forward, and how you might document that? And so everyone needs to have a goal or goals. We see people with goals are the most productive and actually most high performing in workplaces as well. And so I'd always recommend at least one. And then from there, it's about signing off, enabling the employee to have a copy, and certainly a copy on their HR file. This closes the loop. It puts it back into the folder. It puts it on the shelf. It puts it back into the SharePoint, absolutely. But it's there, and the employee has a copy as well. This is about documentation. This is about evidence, and everyone needs that baseline Everyone needs that documentation to know where they're going next and how it can actually work. And to have an open door policy around that, in that if they want to come back and ask more questions around that too, as part of that sign-off and agreement, to ensure that the sequencing is set quite strongly and structured. So some of the do's and don'ts. Establish climate, review the KPIs. Also the staff reviewing their own performance, and that's part of that 360 that I mentioned before. Present your assessment. Make sure that they have a look at it before you actually go into the performance review period of time, and thinking about and mentioning that 1 to 2 week period. You don't want to give it to them 5 minutes before the review takes place. That wouldn't be fair. Let them explain their situation. Let them explain where they're coming from and what they're up to, how they've been performing. You certainly want to resolve any disagreements before you go into the performance appraisal time, and or if they actually take place during that period of time as well. In the end result, all parties have to have a win-win. This is a much better outcome than any sort of win-lose. And you also want to plan together for the future. So again, it's that rapport and trust building. It's that conversation. And so in that sense, it's about having the conversation and acting respectfully. Some of that critical information may need to be clarified. And I always suggest that you don't want to argue around thoughts and feelings or perceptions. It's about what are the facts, what is the evidence, what is it that needs to be done, how do people need to perform, and in that way it's about requesting that in a reasonable way. Sometimes you might actually have to cut the person some slack, and you want to do that in a constructive way, and that might actually take some feedback as well. And in those positions, you want to be able to state the purpose of the conversation. You want to be able to describe the particular behaviour and describe the effect of that particular behaviour too on the situation where that person may not have been performing. So, for example, it might be that because they haven't been performing and behaving in a who knows, a negative way, well then what sort of impact does that have culturally in the workplace and from a morale perspective as well. And then it's about stating what it is that you actually want them to do differently. So I need you to not do that anymore. I would like you to do this, and I need that done by 3 o'clock this afternoon. If you really are in that micromanaging position, hopefully you won't need to be, but it's about assertive communication. You don't want to be in a position as a manager where you are falling into some sort of passive aggressive situation. People actually really like to get feedback, they like to be told, they like to be consulted with, and that's fair and reasonable. Some of the, and agree upon new goals going forward, absolutely, as part of the do's. Some of the don'ts, and I mentioned this before, don't discuss personalities. That is certainly not part of a performance review framework. So, as I said, you want to assess someone's performance, not their personality. Don't skirt around criticism either. And that could be a situation where someone wants to actually give you some feedback. They don't know how to give feedback, and you're right there in the moment, in the performance appraisal, and your employee wants to give you some feedback. My suggestion is that you probably have to take it on the chin, unless you're in an unsafe position and you're feeling extremely uncomfortable around it. Then my suggestion would be that you'd say thank you, and I would like to talk about that a little bit more. You don't want to compare to others. This is an absolute no-no. So, for example, Ray is doing a better job than Larry today, as an example. That's not what you do in the workplace. It's about that you are just critiquing, you are just assessing, and you are just appraising based on the person's performance over the period of time. It doesn't support morale, it doesn't support productivity if you are going to compare to others. And don't critique outside your control. So if, for example, there was supposed to be a performance appraisal taking place today, the particular manager called in sick, wasn't available, and you were asked as a favour or as a professional colleague to actually critique that particular person who wasn't necessarily in your team, there might be a dotted line relationship to that particular person. But I would always be suggesting that you need to be careful around that. And so it might be that that particular appraisal might be postponed for the period of time. And then don't argue about appraisals. You do not want to get into an argument at the appraisal time around how good or bad and what are the strengths or benefits around a performance appraisal. This is not good for the workplace. It's not good for productivity. These are the sorts of things that should be raised as part of the performance management training in the first place. So some of the behaviours in communication, and I've raised these and I'll flick them up now. So it's about body positioning, avoiding personal biases, making sure you encourage people and use encouragement. Ray, you're doing a great job today. Thank you very much. As simple as that. Staff say to me that they actually never even get told thank you. I'm so surprised at that. Obviously, you don't want to say thank you all of the time if it isn't warranted, but you need to be conscious and mindful of actually thanking your people for the job for the day or that particular project that they may have completed. And reward and recognition is absolutely a wonderful framework to have in place as well. Not so much out of scope for this performance appraisal webinar, but it's certainly something to think about there too. Paraphrasing, so repeating back to them so that it acknowledges that you are listening, identify problems, and show an interest and be really present in when you appraise your people. Listen to what they're saying, look for the meaning behind the words, have no interruptions, use clear language and open body posture and open questions. This is going to support the whole performance management situation. And it's about generating solutions too. So if you've actually exhausted all of the solutions, it might be about a simple statement or a question. So would you give me permission to also provide a solution in this sense as well? And by asking for permission, it's empowering, it's consultative, and it leads to open communication and, again, that rapport and trust building. And use empathic responses. Put yourself in that person's shoes. Let them know that you actually care. It doesn't mean to say that all day, every day, you're going to be walking around asking people around, how they're going. But it's about that you use that as a leader, you use that as part of your role modeling because you're the manager, you're the leader, and so lead from the front. And give specific feedback. I say here feed forward, term by Marshall Goldsmith. Absolutely love the term. And so feedback is about the past, but feed forward is about the future. So what else can the employee do to continually improve their performance? And be very specific about that. So if it was ABC in the past as part of the feedback, it might be DEF going forward as part of the feedback around what it is that you would like them to do as part of the project, as part of their roles and new responsibilities. And then to summarize. And so to bring it all together, everyone loves a conclusion, you like a happy ending, you like a good story, people like narratives, and so summarization at the very end of that performance review period is particularly important. So the top 6 things to remember, and I don't know if we've absolutely covered everything, but these are my top 6 things to remember. Be prepared. Know what you're going to say. Don't wing it on the day. Make sure you have the documentation. Make sure you have the evidence. Make sure you've taken the notes. Have your correct templates and checklists and policies and procedures there with you at that moment. And if you've got 6 people to do today, then you need documentation for those 6 people. You might do that over a couple of day period. Allocate appropriate time. The employee deserves your time. So again, it's about being present. Don't have phones ringing. Don't get interruptions going down. Make sure you give them the time that they deserve. Ensure the room is quiet, no phones ringing, and no interruptions. Number 4, ensure you're in the right frame of mind. This is particularly important. And yep, you might have had a bad morning and you're doing appraisals in the afternoon. If it's been that bad, then you might have to postpone them. But don't go into that performance appraisal time in a negative mindset, and be mindful of the tone of voice that you use, the language, etc. in these situations. Number 5, there should be no surprises at the performance review. Don't bring up anything that the employee has not already been made aware of. So if you had someone not performing a month ago, don't wait to the performance appraisal or performance review time where you actually give them that feedback. If something's not happening and you would like it to be done, and there's a project going on or a time frame that it needs to be done by, then you need to give that feedback sooner than the following month when you do the formal performance review. And number 6, keep to the facts. If you cite an issue, be prepared to go and back it up. So again, it's about that documentation. The time, the place, the date, who was involved, and all of those sorts of elements. You don't want to put yourself into a position where you haven't documented, where you haven't taken the notes, and you don't have the evidence. And it's about, Ray, it wasn't done properly. And Ray says to me, well, when was that? And I say, well, I think it was last Tuesday. And he says, well, it couldn't have been. I wasn't here on Tuesday. So who's flawed? I certainly am. So it's particularly important that you make sure you keep good notes and you keep good documents around performance reviews. So in summary, check that you have a performance management system in place. If not, then develop one. Ensure all of your employees are aware of it and how it relates to them. So that's about training for both managers and staff. Be aware of your communication style and your skills and attend to areas of improvement. Check your levels of emotional intelligence, how you regulate, how you empathize, how you manage your emotions in situations, and practice that as well. Do you need to make changes around that? That's the question. And so at the end, summarize what was covered and agreed to. This is at the end or the end of the period with the performance review timeframe. Express thanks for the staff members' involvement and reinforce commitment to future goals and plans of work. So, for example, Ray, it's been a great session. I've really enjoyed the webinar. I'd like to do more. I think we've worked well together and we've got some goals around how we would actually like to implement those performance issues in the future. So it's that sort of wording, it's that sort of conversation. It's reinforcing for people. People like to know where they're going and why they're doing it on most occasions. Sign off on your document and provide written feedback, which is recorded on the performance agreement. And this should be filed on the EHO file. These are important things because if that person actually decides that they're not happy about a situation and they did take it to the Fair Work Commission, then the judge or the tribunal would be saying to you, show me the evidence path of how you actually supported the worker, how you've inducted them, how you've performance appraised them, how you've encouraged them. And this is the sort of documentation that you would need to provide as part of that review. So again, it's about the paperwork, it's about the documentation. So whether you've got it online or you've got it in manual copies, either way, it's important documentation. So remember, the performance management process, it is about a continuous improvement cycle. You want to set agreed performance tasks and goals. You want to implement them. And implementation is sometimes the hardest part. We can talk about these things forever. We can design great templates and checklists, but the implementation part will be the most important. And you may not get it right the first time around, but continue to practice, continue to have a go, and continue to support your people in this way. Monitor their performance, be it on a daily basis, weekly. Check in with them. Have those times when it can be informal about how they're going and what they're doing, and record that information, even if it's just on your own diary. And provide constructive feedback and feed forward for your people, so how they've been doing in the past and what you would like them to do in the future. This is a real morale booster. It supports productivity and it creates much more sustainable workplaces.
Many thanks for that, Larry. That was a very comprehensive discussion about performance management. Now, we did have a number of questions that came through ahead of time and a few during the presentation. I think, Larry, that you covered off the vast majority of them in the course of your presentation, and we are running out of time, so we won't be able to get to any of the other questions today. But I'd like to thank you for your time, Larry. And remember that if you require HR consulting support, Larry and his team of highly trained internal HR consultants will be more than happy to work with you to help develop your staff. Check out their services at www.australianbusiness.com.au/HR, or you can email Larry at larry.forsyth, that's Forsyth, at australianbusiness.com.au. We hope you found today's session useful. Please feel free to drop us a line at editor@workplaceinfo.com.au if you have any follow-up questions, and make sure you log on to Workplace Info and Workplace OHS for the latest information on compliance and best practices for HR, IR, and work safety professionals. If you want to revisit some of today's presentation, an archive will be published on our YouTube channel to watch and listen to at your leisure. And we'll be sending that URL out to you in our follow-up correspondence. And I know a lot of people have been asking about, whether we will have a copy of the presentation. You'll get an email in a few days that will give you all that information. Meanwhile, keep an eye on your email inbox for information on our upcoming webinars, and including a discussion we'll be having next month about enterprise agreements. In the meantime, thanks for your time, and best of luck in your work.